Hello and welcome back to my series on running Frog God games, The Blight. Um, this is going to be our final video. I'm going to run down how I finished up my campaign and some other things. So let me just give a brief recap. This video assumes that you've watched my previous videos and kind of know what I was working towards. So I'm not going to recap all of that, just kind of catch us up to exactly where we're picking up. So, the point at which I'm in my campaign, I've run the Levy Adventure Path with many, many modifications that I've detailed in the previous videos. Specifically, Shaftiel, the angel, known as the Beautiful in the Levy campaign path, is not the one from the write-up. I've written her up as a chaotic good angel who has two goals. She's looking to save and redeem the city of Casterhage, and she's hoping to redeem her sister Demorial, who's the devil who essentially runs Casterhage. So one of the paths Shaftiel has taken is that she's allied herself with the revolution that's looking to overthrow the aristocracy of the capital. The aristocracy that has been backed and corrupted by Demorial. So where we left off specifically is the capital has levied its response to the revolution after their first strides to take over Toiltown. They bombarded Toiltown from the Lime River using their large man-of-war warship. The aristocracy also allied itself with Beltane, who's the ruler of the Fetch. So the siege involved bombardment from the river from the ship, and the Fetch rising up from underneath the city to attack Toiltown. Now, in this attack, a couple of things happened. The PCs have a chance to save and defend the city, but you also finally get a chance to see the veneer around Shaftiel start to crack. In the carnage that ensued, and in the aftermath, Shaftiel loses her temper. She drops her protections on the city, at least the capital-controlled parts of the city, allowing creatures from the Between to start to infiltrate the city. She also starts to show sadness and grief at the loss of life amongst the people that she is choosing to defend and uphold. So this is an important thing for the PCs to see. She's not perfect. She's prone to fits of anger, and also has tremendous feeling and remorse towards the things that are happening to the Toiltowners. So this was an important thing for the PCs to see. So this is where things are going to pick up now, and I think this is about where we got to in the previous video. Now, one of the things that happened during the siege is the capital also used the siege as sort of a smokescreen for one of their real attacks. Grand Justice Bracken, as part of his network, employs a collection of doppelgangers called the Veil. And so the Veil took the opportunity of all the chaos from the siege in order to infiltrate Toiltown and replace some of the people the PCs have come to know. And this is going to come into play a little later when I start going through the adventure breakdown. Now, one of the things I wanted to preface this all with is my goal for the finale of the campaign. I've been sort of, at least for the Revolution Act 2 part of my campaign, really been putting Demorial and Shaftiel on a collision course. And over the course of this final stretch of the campaign, I have Demorial pop up from time to time. Usually body snatching somebody the PCs are dealing with, and sort of talking to the PCs, trying to seduce them to her side, also offering aid and assistance here and there. Demorial is trying to set herself up as someone who's not necessarily a villain. Someone who kind of gets how the city works. A realist, if you will. So someone the PCs could potentially ally themselves with under the right circumstances. And, and that is what I'm trying to set up here. At the same time, as I did with the siege, I'm showing Shaftiel to not be this perfect angelic being who the PCs can idolize and not see as being capable of making mistakes. So I've got the angel Shaftiel, who's imperfect, and I've got this devil Demorial, who's not necessarily the worst. What I'm ultimately trying to do over the course of this final stretch is create a compelling reason for when the PCs get to the end, where maybe it's not entirely clear who they're going to side with. Who are they going to, whose play are they going to back? And when they finally learn more about Shaftiel and Demorial's background in this final stretch, it really sort of sets the stage for a potential showdown between Demorial and Shaftiel, but also where it's not entirely clear which side the PCs are going to be on. But that'll make a lot more sense when I sort of get there in my sort of rundown of the adventures leading up to the finale. But at the end of the day, I want the players to have a choice as to who they're going to back. And I don't want it to be an easy choice where it's clearly this is who you should back. All right. So that is sort of the background. Now I want to talk about how we get there. I'm not going to go into great detail for each adventure, but I'm just going to go through the steps that I took in order to get there. The first things first is with the siege and with Beltane sending the fetch up from the underneath. It became clear that Beltane was a problem the PCs needed to deal with. So the first thing they decided to do was, finally do something about him. One of the interesting things they were presented with is that, if you just kill Beltane without setting up someone to sort of take over, it could create major problems for them. So this is where you can present different undead figures throughout the city who could potentially fill that void. So there's a lot of role playing that could take place there. The book has a number of different people. There's His Holiness the Drogue, who was a rogue vampire affiliated with Mother Grace. He's a possibility, though not a great one. Then there's Count Strord, who is a lich. He's the one the PCs ultimately ended up going with because he was sort of a more reasonable option for them. So they go down, they deal with Beltane. Count Strord goes in and takes over. So that was one major thing that they needed to deal with. The next thing they needed to deal with, the revolution decided to start pressing towards the other side of the line. And a big part of that was going to be taking Town Bridge. But what ends up happening is when they make their press on Town Bridge, they walk right into an ambush. And this introduces sort of the section of the campaign where they don't know exactly what's going on. How did the capital know exactly what they were going to do? And this is where the concept of possibly having spies within the ranks comes into play. So there's a whole stretch of little encounters and adventuring that sort of brings into focus the fact that they have spies. And so this is where you can have a nice espionage element to the campaign, where they need to sort of ferret out the doppelgangers, figure out who's been replaced, and provide a nice interesting change of pace for the players. Eventually they do figure out what's going on. They hunt down the doppelganger hideout. And eventually they're able to root out the spies slash doppelgangers from their ranks. Once they sort of get a beachhead into, Booktown, they take, Townbridge, they move into Booktown. Now they're basically on the doorstep of the capital. But one of the things, when you read up about the capital, a frontal attack on the capital is really going to be just a bloodbath. And so the most sensible way is getting in through the river. The capital has its own docks. There's also Gnome Town, who has their own docks. But the big problem there is the man o' war, as well as, the small fleet that the capital has at their disposal. So this is another nice area of adventuring. You can actually have some ship action, and ultimately with the goal of the players being able to take on this massive ship that's an obstacle to them. They can either elect to destroy it, try and take it over, and bring it over to the Revolution. My players chose a more subtle approach and ultimately ended up capturing the man of war, which made getting into the capital docks much, much easier for them, which then led into the next section of the progression of the Revolution, which is taking the capital docks and establishing a beachhead within Gnome Town. One of the interesting little wrinkles I threw at them is, this is the capital. They're going to have some sort of elaborate defense at the docks that's not going to make this an easy task. And what I did was I had the capital have a guardian monster, specifically a sea dragon that lived within the docks. Now, any dragon is not going to want to be protecting, the capital and their docks here. So I had it have like a thing around its neck that kept it, under the control of the capital. So the players, they could just try and kill the dragon, or they could try and release the dragon. And a dragon being released from its servitude would be probably pretty grateful and willing to lend a little aid to securing the dock, which is what ultimately my players ended up doing. Rather than killing the dragon, they released it from its servitude, and the dragon helped them maintain their foothold at the dock. So at this point, the players now just have to work their way up to the crown level, and along with the Revolution. So once they establish the beachhead, then it's really now, invading the embage level of the capital. Now, this is where I figured a lot of the large-scale battles would take place. So this is where, along with your players, you can do some wargaming. You could have them control, units. This is where you could really sort of get into sort of like, a more large-scale battle type of play. Because I figured the capital, like the aristocracy, is not going to want to do this kind of fight in the Crooked Key, and they're certainly not going to want to have this kind of fight in the Crown. So they were going to probably concentrate all of their power, all of their efforts right here in the Embage. This is really the make or break area for the capital once the Revolution got that foothold. So this is where you could have a lot of interesting sort of fighting going on in terms of large scale battles, more targeted things for the PCs to do. my players had a lot of fun here. One of the things I also decided to do was have the capital have a lot of clockwork soldiers, clockwork monsters, in order to throw some diverse challenges at the players. I had them deal with this giant clockwork titan that they ultimately had to take down. So it was a fun sort of thing for them. Once they captured the Embage, then next was the Crooked Key. Now, one of the things that had happened when the doppelgangers replaced a lot of people in Town Bridge, not Town Bridge, in Toil Town, they didn't necessarily kill the people they replaced. They were going to want to pump those people for information. They had to feed information back to the doppelgangers to make sure their infiltration was, a little more seamless. And so all of these people ended up in purgatory. Now, in the write-up for the capital, if memory serves, purgatory is actually in the bottom level, the same level as Gnome Town and everything. I decided not to do that. I moved it up to the Crooked Key. Given that this was Grand Justice Bracken's little playground, it really felt like it made more sense to move it up. And so when the revolution makes it to the Crooked Key, the players are tasked with going to Purgatory to release their people, while the revolution kind of mops up and deals with whatever resistance is here in the Crooked Key. Now, you could approach this a lot differently. You could have more battles there, but I felt after everything they did in the Embage, it would just be sort of repetitive to do some of that stuff here on the Crooked Key. So I had the revolution leaders take care of that, while the players went on a more special ops mission to go after the prison, release their people, and get them back. It was also a chance to have a nice boss battle with Justice Bracken. So the players dealt with that. Then it was time to go up to the crown. So this is where I had a last stand for the aristocracy at the opening to the royal palace. And then once they dealt with that, then we're at the finale. Where everything has been leading up to this. So the way I had it, the way I structured it, was that Shaftiel marches off towards the capital. She's finally ready to take the battlefield. But before I sort of go into that, one of the things the players did along the way is they had an opportunity to learn more about Shaftiel and Demorial. And the way I did that is the revolution got some intel that the capital was trying to break the spell or the ritual that transported the city of Casterhage from the prime material plane to the between. Given the strategic advantage the revolution has, cutting the capital off from all of their resources, keeping them in the between for the revolution was paramount. So the PCs, followed up on this intel and stopped, the revolution, or not the revolution, the capital from doing this. But in doing so, they also gained some intelligence. They learned about a library that some of the capital wizards were trying to get into in order to learn more about the ritual, so that they could figure out how to break it. They were experimenting with a lot of things, and that's ultimately what the PCs ended up stopping. But they were hoping to get into this library in order to learn more. And it was a library run by devils. So it was an infernal library. I ended up naming it Hellfire Hall. So the PCs found this information interesting. They don't entirely trust Shaftiel, and especially to put the city back where it belongs. So they were interested in learning more about the ritual and having that as a backup plan should they ever need it. So, they ended up gaining access to Hellfire Hall. You could do this any way you want. Conveniently, one of my players had a connection due to the fact that he sold his soul, and had what is essentially almost like a warlock pact going on. Through some wheeling and dealing and doing some favors, they were able to gain access to Hellfire Hall. So they were able to gain two important pieces of information that had a great impact on the finale. One, they learned about the history of Demoriel and Shaftiel, specifically that they were sisters. I can't remember if I had mentioned this in previous videos, but they are in fact sisters. They were both angels. Now, before Lucifer fell, Demoriel became infatuated with him. And so when Lucifer fell, Demoriel followed. Shaftiel felt a fair amount of responsibility because, when Demoriel was considering falling, in following Lucifer, Shaftiel gave her the cold shoulder and criticized her and didn't act very sisterly. Basically, she was, appalled at Demoriel even considering this. So when Demoriel ultimately fell and Shaftiel's anger eventually sort of dissipated, she felt tremendous regret and guilt over what happened. And then when Demoriel eventually went on to do all kinds of evil things, Shaftiel felt even greater guilt. And so the PCs are able to learn this. The devils had this documented. And so this was information that players never had, and they didn't realize that, that there was a personal angle here. Because Shaftiel never told them about her relationship with Demoriel, or that Demoriel was even a figure, operating within the city. So this was a major revelation. They also had some intel that they were able to give the PCs that Shaftiel seems to be obsessed with trying to find and save her sister. And over the years had done some things that weren't exactly great in her efforts to stop Demoriel's rule within Casterhage. I had her, release some sort of plague on the city. That was one of the reasons why they had the great fires. And when you go through the city history in the book. So I tried to connect some of the things that happened in the city's history to Shaftiel's meddling in order to try and stop her sister. And Demoriel, they also learned, goes all the way back to the founding of the city, and her machinations started all the way back then. So this is all interesting information that PCs are able to gain. They also are able to get the details of the ritual. And they learn a couple of important things. They learn that the ritual, has two main parts. There is the transportation, where the city gets moved, but there's also a tethering part of the ritual. Basically, when you break the ritual, the tether puts the city back where it belongs. So in order for the city to be able to spring back, it needs to be tethered. So this was just an important piece that they learned. And so when they get back from Hellfire Hall, they eventually confront Shaftiel. They also show her the copy of the ritual. And this is where things get interesting. When Shaftiel looks at the copy of the ritual that they found, she, practically falls down in shock and horror, realizing that it was not the version of the ritual that she used. The version of the ritual she used did not have the tether. And she doesn't tell everyone in the party this. There were certain players who she was more connected with, and that's who she had this conversation with. And so, there's this possibility that the city's not tethered, and that there may not be an easy way of putting it back where it belongs. So they decide to backburner this. They realize they still need to dealing with the capital, finishing the revolution before they could worry about how to put the city back. But the PCs learned some important things here. They learned that even more so that Shaftiel is flawed, but they also learned that she does seem to care, and she was upset that the city might be in danger due to her making a mistake. So they learned some interesting stuff here. Fast forward now to the finale. Now, one of the things the PCs are going to learn here, as well as Shaftiel, is that all of this was happening according to Demorial's plan. So when Shaftiel goes marching into the royal palace, the PCs are hot on her heels. They go into the throne room and they find Demorial. And this is where you get to do sort of the villain exposition. Shaftiel commands Demorial to give up, that her plan to rule the city has failed, all of her allies are dead, so on and so forth. The whole, you're finished. Demorial seems amused by Shaftiel's rant, and then sort of lays out how Shaftiel has been a fool, and has been a fool all along. Specifically, that one of the things that the PCs also learn is that Demorial was the one who caged her in the first place. At the beginning of the levy, Father Cromwell is trying to figure out how to free Demorial from the Between. What we don't know, and what wasn't actually in the levy, was one of the things I created, was that, how she ended up in the Between in the first place. And Demorial was the one who put her there. During one of Shaftiel's previous attempts to stop her sister, Demorial enlisted a group of heroes and caged Demorial into the Between. So this is Demorial's cage. And so one of the things Demorial points out to Shaftiel is like, hey, when you started trying to get out of your cage, did you think I wouldn't know? It was my cage. And so I actually thought it would be amusing to actually create a little crack for you. A crack for you to start getting out of the cage, to reach out to someone to try and help you. And so she allowed her to be able to start weakening the bars of the cage and enlisting help. And so when Father Cromwell travels from Wiccan to Casterhage and starts, looking for ways of getting Demorial out of her prison, Demorial's like, how did you expect me not to know? This is my city. I have eyes and ears everywhere. When this priest starts bumbling around the city looking for information, of course I knew. And at that point, it wasn't hard for me to be able to curate the information he was finding. When he was looking for certain spells and rituals, it was easy for me to curate which versions of those spells and rituals he found. Father Cromwell was the one who found the ritual for Demorial to transport the city. So, of course, it was the version without a tether. And so one of the things I was setting up here is all through this discourse, as Demorial is sort of laying out sort of her plan and what she did to Shaftiel, she's also calling Shaftiel a fool. She's also saying, pointing out all of the death, all of the carnage from the revolution, all the things Shaftiel has done, and is saying, great job, sister. I couldn't have done it better myself. All the carnage, all the death, all the blood on your hands. And she's, Demorial is calling Shaftiel her greatest success and a failure of an angel, essentially. Poking and prodding and goading, trying to get Shaftiel to lose it. And one of the final reveals that Demorial says is that, and don't worry, sister, the city is not trapped here in the Between. Sure, the version of the ritual you had didn't have the tether. One of the things from the final adventure of the Levy is when Shaftiel, or the Beautiful, is doing this ritual. There's rain and all kinds of crazy stuff happening in the city. It was very obvious something was happening as it was written in the Levy Adventure Path. So, Demoriel actually points this out. She's like, it was obvious when you were performing this ritual. So I knew exactly when to cast the tether onto myself. And so this is one of the big reveals, is that Demoriel is the tether. Should Demoriel die, there is no tether. Should Demoriel do a plane shift and go back to the Hells, there is no tether. If the PCs want to save the city and put it back, Demoriel can't die and she can't leave. And at this point, Demoriel is poking and prodding at Shaftiel and basically making Shaftiel feel like a complete and absolute failure, at the same time trying to stoke her anger. And one of the things you've seen up until this point, after the siege, Shaftiel had a temper tantrum. A couple of different points, the PCs have seen cracks in Shaftiel's armor where she's not always calm, cool, and collected. And Demoriel, being her sister, knows what buttons to push. And so this is where I had the PCs make some perception rolls. And, they start to see the Shaftiel's white feathers on her wings start to gray. And she starts to fall. And so this is where the path diverges, and the PCs are going to have some choices. So Shaftiel loses it. She falls into a fit of anger, and she's determined to kill Demoriel for everything she's done. Gone is her desire to save her sister, and she's not thinking clearly about the ramifications that this is going to have on Castor Age. She goes into a blind rage and she wants to kill her sister. She's starting to fall. And so the PCs now have a choice. Do they try and stop Shaftiel from falling? Do they try and talk her down? Do they side with Shaftiel? Yeah, Demoriel sucks. We'll figure out what to do with the city later. Let's just stop Demoriel. So do they try and talk down Shaftiel? Do they side with Shaftiel? Or do they side with Demoriel, realizing they may not like her, but they might need to protect her from Shaftiel and end up, fighting Shaftiel. So you could play this in a lot of different ways. My players actually ended up making some pretty good rolls. Memory serves, one of them even hit a nat 20. And they were ultimately able to talk down Shaftiel from attacking. So at this point, they then, a battle ensues. And you can approach this any way you want. The way I had it was that, they were in the throne room in the seat of Demoriel's power. So clearly she would have a contingency in place that would stop her sister. She had no desire to have her sister come in and do whatever she was going to do. Because I wanted to take Shaftiel off the board, at least temporarily, if the PCs decided to fight Demoriel. And so they decided to fight and capture Demoriel ultimately, once they stopped Shaftiel's blind rage. So Demoriel enacts the throne room's defenses. Shaftiel gets basically she's in like a magical cage right there in the throne room. And what I also had was that the cage was siphoning the power from Shaftiel to Demoriel. So there was a skill challenge here. They were fighting Shaftiel, or rather Demoriel. Demorial also had some minions there that the PCs had to deal with, but they couldn't actually damage Demorial until they shut down the room's defenses. And in shutting down the room's defenses, they could also release Shaftiel from the cage. So phase one of the battle was that. Eventually they shut down the defenses. Shaftiel is released. She's now a weakened version of her. So she was kind of at the same rough power level as the PCs. And so was able to assist in finally taking down and capturing Demorial. Demorial's defeated. And at that point, Shaftiel breaks the ritual, keeping the city in the between, and it goes back to where it belongs. Shaftiel takes Demorial back to heaven, and that's all said and done. Obviously, you could do any kind of epilogue you want. I let the PCs see a sort of a cutscene where Demorial is in heaven, stuck in a house where that's her prison, and having to deal with daily talks from her sister trying to reform her. But I kind of leave it up in the air that Demorial is kind of biding her time until she can free herself. So there's kind of this, the PCs have won, the city is saved, but Demorial is not necessarily off the board completely. And the PCs are able to then, see a new regime take over the city. They're able to become heroes of the city and of the revolution. They have almost like a celebrity status now. And so that's the conclusion of the campaign. There was a lot of other things that I did specific to the PCs and their backstories, but that was the conclusion of the revolution and how I went about it. All right. Couple of things now. Looking back, what are some things I would have done differently? I think I would have liked to have introduced Demorial earlier. Early on in the campaign, I didn't know that we were necessarily going to take things this far. And I really should have introduced her sooner, have her develop more of a relationship with the players. I think, when you get to that final scene in the throne room, if they had as strong of a relationship with Demorial as they did with Shaftiel, who knows, maybe it might have made it a lot tougher for them to make a decision there. And maybe things would have gone differently. I don't know. But I feel like it would have just made things a little bit more dramatic had they had more of a relationship with Demorial going into it. I definitely had her, make contact with the PCs, a lot in that final stretch. But I think it would have been better to have done that sooner. So if I could have done something different, I think that's one thing I would have done different. I think I would have also liked to have worked in the Crown Justices earlier in the campaign, maybe even during the levy portion of the campaign. They had a showdown with Bracken, at the Crooked Key. Had Crown Justice Ashlia, running the final defenses, the last stand at the doorstep of the Royal Palace in the finale. I think those battles would have had a little bit more emotional stakes had the PCs had more contact with the Crown Justices leading up to it. Those are some things I think I would have done differently if I could go back and do it all over again. Other than that, I don't think there's a lot that I would have changed. I was very happy with how things unfolded. So just to conclude things, this is going to be my last video on the Blight series, unless folks in the comments request something that seems to make sense for another video. So thank you if you've been watching all the videos and keeping up with them up until this point. I appreciate you folks doing so. The Levy was a great adventure path. I didn't run it as written. In my other videos, sort of detail the changes I made to it. Depending on the kind of adventure you want to have and the kind of experience you want to have with your players, you could easily run it as written. But I personally think it was better to sort of zhuzh it up a little bit. But it's got great bones, and there's a lot of good stuff there to work with in terms of putting together a really good sort of experience for your players. Tons and tons of place to customize within the Levy adventure path. Casterhage and the Blight as a setting was fantastic. It's a great detailed city, and I really enjoyed playing within it with my players. There were so many great ideas, so much great history, so many great locations, so many great NPCs. The authors really did a great job of putting something great together for you. I think early on I talked about, that the conversion from Pathfinder to 5e was uneven. I didn't care. It didn't really make much of a difference to me. I ended up making so many more custom stat blocks along the way, or taking existing stat blocks and beefing them up, changing them, customizing them, that it really didn't matter. And it wasn't hard to make adjustments on the fly if there was something in there that didn't make sense and just wasn't converted well. So as someone who doesn't look for plug and play, honestly, it didn't matter to me at the end of the day. So no matter what system you're running, this is a great setting. You could even take this setting outside of Pathfinder, outside of 5e, Dungeons and Dragons, and you can run this with something else. For example, something like Savage Worlds. It's a great setting that stands on its own 2 feet, regardless of what rule system you're going to use to run it. I love it, and I can't recommend it more as far as something worth picking up and playing. That book has so much good information for a GM, especially if you like to have something pre-made and you don't want to have to initially go off the cuff and create your own. So I recommend it. So I guess I'm going to conclude the video here. Once again, thank you for watching and participating in this series of videos. Like I said, it's my last one on the Blight unless you folks decide you want more and you give me something good to talk about. I may come back again with another series on my current campaign. I'm currently in the preparation stages for running a Fallout game, the video game Fallout TV series on Amazon. Running Fallout using the Savage Worlds rule set. I may do a video on that. I'm strongly considering it. If that sounds like something of interest to you, feel free to put something in the comments. All right, thank you, and fun gaming.